Well, I'd perhaps be speaking on behalf of my entire family when I say that my guest today is deeply aspirational. She's the exception rather than the rule. And she's someone who blends worldly fame and success with preserving an inner scorecard, which so many of us find very hard to do. But she does it like child's play. She continues to fiercely follow her true north, which involves some shape and form of storytelling, acting, directing, but of course also a lot of social advocacy. Nandita, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, Saba. Thank you, and thank you for the sweet and rather flattering introduction. Not sure I deserve all of it, but thank you.
No, allow me to start by saying, Nandita, the reason why I've said that my mother is a huge fan, as is the rest of my family, is not to reference her, but to say I think they're amongst lots and lots of people around the globe whose lives you've touched in some shape or form. And to me, that signals something very, very special because you're touching people's lives agnostic to age, agnostic to place where they stay, ethnicity, all of that. And God knows we need more of that in our times. So this is an absolute privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank
I want to
you.
start, Nandita, by talking about the sort of growing up, the early memories. And in particular, I want to start by asking about what your parents were like. And I'll tell you, of course, one is curious in any podcast to ask people about the early years, but I read this beautiful piece that you'd written called Baba and about your father. And I don't want to be the one I wanted that to come from you, but it moved me so deeply. And then elsewhere you'd said that as I plunged deeper into Manto's life, I wondered why he seemed so familiar. I soon realized that it felt like I was reading about my father, Jatin Das. Baba, as I call him, is an artist, and much like Manto, he is instinctively unconventional, fearlessly blunt, and often misunderstood. Talk to us, Nandita, about those early years, but in particular about the relationship with your father.
Well, thank you for asking, and I'm assuming you have seen the book then, Manto
Yes.
and I, the one that I wrote about the journey of making the film. And yes, for me, I think I also anchored towards Manto because I felt it was really so familiar. I mean, I've always felt my father is very Manto-esque, and I'm sure there are these hidden crazy people around the world who just don't fit in, and who are constantly struggling and are constantly misunderstood. So yeah, I grew up with a Manto. My father is from Odisha, my mother is from Gujarat. They met in Bombay, and then they moved to Delhi, which is where I spent the first 40 years of my life. So in many ways, I'm a Dilli wali,
Yeah.
and in the last 12 years that I moved to Bombay for matters of the heart. Whether they were right or wrong is a different matter, but it wasn't for the film industry. And everyone said that Bombay is the place. How can you act sitting in Delhi? But I never wanted to do mainstream cinema, so it worked well for me. My mother used to work. She worked at the National. That was later, but she worked at the National Book Trust first, and retired as the director there, and then went on to the National Gandhi Museum as a director. So she's a workaholic in her own way, and comes from a very Gandhian family. So my bedtime stories at my grandparents, which was in Bombay, were all these Gandhian stories. And my father came from a small town in Odisha called Baripada. And so that was a totally different world, with a well and a pond, and fish being taken out of the pond, and all the cousins sleeping together, etc. And so every summer holidays we had 1 month in Baripada and 1 month in Bombay, which was a bigger city than Delhi, even now, probably more cosmopolitan, more modern, and all of that. So I think just straddling those two worlds really taught me that whether today I'm staying in a 5-star hotel, but I'm just as comfortable if I have to sleep on the carpet or a dari, I'll be fine. And I think that's what my parents taught me. In fact, my father had a studio at home and my mother went to work. So I grew up thinking that mothers work and fathers cook and clean and for recreation paint. And in a way, I'm glad that that role reversal happened so early in my life, because otherwise, as children, if that's what you see, then you start subconsciously stereotyping the roles that men and women must play. Um,
Sure.
and and sometimes I struggle, maybe I struggled more with it because I just expected men to do all of this. And then the rude shock comes in later in your life and you realize, no, that's not the norm. My father is a better cook than my mother, and is a very eclectic cook, so he used to make my lunch boxes and stuff like that. So yeah, and they separated when I was six and a half, so I really sort of grew up with both. And it was a they were very, very different. And I probably, I hope, I want to believe that I got the best of both and probably the worst of both as well.
Sure, absolutely. Now, coming to the craft, Nandita, you've said that acting was neither a dream nor an ambition, but every character and every experience has enriched my life. I'm curious to ask you, what was it originally that you had hoped to sort of do, and how did you stumble upon this industry?
Yeah, so I did my geography honors and then my
Yes.
master's in social work. It had nothing to do with acting. There's nobody in the family. In fact, film was not seen as a form of entertainment in our home. Like, we never really went to cinema as such. It was
Really?
always, yeah, it was very unusual because everybody, that was the main form of entertainment in the country. And even television came maybe 8, 9 years after everybody had a TV. So for
And
us,
you
it was
currently
very.
don't have a TV in your home, is that correct?
Well, I have to admit that after 7 years, I just bought a TV.
Oh, you did?
When
Okay.
the cricket match was going on, and my son was like, Mama, I can't watch it on the laptop anymore. And I was like,
Fair enough.
let's go and get it. So I succumbed to my child's. And he's not a TV watcher either. So since that two matches of IPL, I've not even opened it. I'm still figuring out how to navigate the fire stick and all that stuff, the remote. I feel like I've come from some village. But yeah, but we never watched films. I was introduced to films as late as in college, and that too with a bunch of friends who wanted to be filmmakers. And so they straight introduced me to more independent cinema, to regional cinema, going to film festivals. At that time, Delhi had the main international film festival, and it also had an Asian film festival. So,
Right.
that's what I was exposed to. We'd go to the Alliance Francaise for French films and to the Russian Center for Russian films and Max Muller Bhavan for the German. So for me, I somehow just skipped that whole exposure to mainstream cinema. And probably because of that, never really anchored towards it. So it's not like I've resisted some great temptation. I just was never really tempted. So it was a very different trajectory in that sense. And I just met Deepa Mehta through a friend, and she offered me Fire. That was the first film. In fact, she didn't audition me, and she was going to, and then she said, "No, no, you're going to play the character." And then Shabana
Wow.
Azmi was cast. And after she was cast, in fact, I told Deepa, I said, Deepa, please audition me. I'm going to be like opposite Shabana Azmi, an icon that I have. Her films are the ones that I had grown up watching. So those were the kind of films. So she was like, no, I'm confident. I'm like, okay. So for me, it was more of an experience. I
Yeah.
wasn't really trying to prove anything because I never wanted to be an actor. I had no idea that there would even be a second film after that. So when people say it was a very bold first film, for me, there was nothing bold about it. I just liked the story. It spoke to me. I felt my family that was so liberal. There was so much space to question and talk about anything and do anything. Yet we didn't really talk about the now what we call LGBTQ issues. But at the time, there were only two words. There was homosexuality and heterosexuality. It was very binary in some sense. And I'm talking about 26 years ago. So it was really a 27 now. We are in 23. So yeah, 27 years ago, things were so shoved under the carpet that nothing was really, there was no vocabulary even to, discuss this properly. So in some sense, I think Fire was not just a landmark film, which it definitely was. It really impacted even the verdict on decriminalizing homosexuality, the archaic law that we had. But it also was a very important turning point in my life, not just because it got me into the path of acting, but also because it really made me conscious of the kind of society I was living in and the kind of, contradictions that we lived in and what people were really going through, and this whole othering that we so normalize in a way. And I think that has become a kind of a theme subconsciously in my work, whether as an actor and more so as a director. The kind of choices I make, I always like to deal with fear and prejudice and discrimination and this othering and sense of, what creates an identity and why. And these are the things that I think got more acute with that journey that started with Fire.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And Nandita, that's such a great segue into my next question, because I was thinking it's hard to talk to Nandita Das and not talk about Deepa Mehta and not talk about. I mean, there's a staggering list, but I was also thinking about Earth, and I
Right.
was thinking
Oh my
about
God.
Deepa, and I
Right.
was thinking about Amir Khan and
Yeah.
you. And so I was like, I want to stay on Earth for a bit. And right from, Nandita, right from the storytelling to the soundtrack
Oh yeah,
to,
beautiful songs. I
right?
mean,
I
it's
mean,
such a pity it was pre-social media and pre-OTT and
exactly.
all that. Otherwise, those songs by A.R. Rahman and written by Javed Saab were just stunning. I mean, they are really evergreen, and I always believe that time is the only test of art. If you ever
So
want to know something is really fantastic, otherwise art is always subjective, right? You may like
true.
something, I may not, but
So
it's really time that can be the only judge. And you hear those songs today, and there's so many songs of the 50s. Why do we still remember them, and why do we still hum
absolutely.
them? Because they just are so beautiful.
Completely. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I was listening to the soundtrack of Earth last week as I was thinking about this podcast. And it's just, I mean, there's something about that sort of music that doesn't leave you. And then, Nandita, the pairing as well. I feel like, and this is 1998, and it's this quietly fierce gem of a film, which I
Mm.
feel really stays with you. And so I suppose my question is, talk to us a little bit about, what went into the crafting of this world of Earth that you were a part of, and also sort of what is its significance in your broader universe and your trajectory. And while we're on it, may I just also say, like you've spoken a bit about Deepa Mehta, but Deepa and Amir Khan both, who I feel in some ways, much like you, are the exception rather than the rule. No, they're not dying to, it seems to an audience, not dying to fit into some mold. So talk to us a bit about Earth and about that experience.
Yeah, so by then Deepa and I had become really good friends, and I was really excited that she was going to do a trilogy, and Earth was the second one, and it was about partition. And I'd grown up, like I said, because of being from a Gandhian family on my mother's side. I'd grown up with lots of stories of partition. I knew uh, people on. I mean, I actually started just after that. My first visit to Lahore was in 1996. It was, just soon after Fire, and I was part of something called South Asians for Human Rights. And so there were many partition stories that I'd heard, and I'd read The Ice Candy Man by Bapsi Sidhwa, on which Earth is based. Fire was a very intimate film, very small crew. It was really three women who were pretty much doing a lot of it, whereas Earth suddenly was a bigger film,
I see.
apart from the fact that Amir was already a big star. And but that apart, I think he in fact molded into Deepa's world. I remember that was the first time he did a sync sound film,
I
and
see.
he would say his dialogues really fast, and Deepa would say, You're just racing through them." He's like, "Don't worry, I'll fix them in the dubbing." And she's like, "There is no dubbing, what you record here is what stays." and
Right.
uh, and in fact, Amir was so happy with the sync sound and the fact that you could truly emote, and that would be captured, and you wouldn't have to redo it in a studio and just sort of stand in one place and go through all those emotions again, that after that, all his films that he produced, he always wanted a sync sound. So sound,
Really?
yeah. And for me, sync sound is what I went into. Like, I thought every film was sync sound because I did
Oh,
Fire, then I did Hazar Chaurasi Ki Maan. There was another film by Govind
yeah.
Nihalani. Then I did a Shyam Benegal film called Hari Bhari. All these films were sync sound, because most of the author kind of filmmakers always want sync sound. There's something about it. All my films are sync sound, the ones that I've directed as well. So yeah, so that was very special. When you are actually acting in a film, it impacts you less of what the film is saying, because you do it in bits and pieces, you're doing technically. For instance, there was a scene where Rahul Khanna, Amir Khan, me, and that little kid who was there, her name was Fenny, I'm forgetting, but the little kid who was the Parsi kid, and we are all looking at the riots, we're looking at buildings being burned. When you see the film, it's the most horrific scene. Like, even when I see it, I want to close my eyes, knowing that, film is all recreation and it's not true. You can really hear a man's legs being pulled apart by two vehicles. It's like chilling. But when we were actually doing it, there was a flag stuck to a stick, and on the opposite side of the building, the flag was going up, and we had to just keep looking, and Deepa was giving a running commentary. Now the house is burning, now the fire brigade comes, and now this happens, and we were like, oh my god, and this and that, and we were just emoting to that flag. And at one point, I remember we all just burst out laughing because her voice and that flag, and she was going a little all over the place, and
Yeah.
trying to make it all frenzy for us. And so when you go through it, it's far more technical. That beautiful song Rutu Aa Gayi Re, which Amir and I did with that kite flying scene, just that day, as luck would have it, the wind was in the opposite direction. So, we had to put a pulley, and the thread was there, but
Yeah.
there was no real kite. And in a sky, you can't give a point. So I had no clue where Amir is looking. He had no clue where I was looking. We were just saying, wahan kahin hai patang. It's like somewhere there. And we were hoping that we are both looking kind of approximately in the same direction for the kite. So sometimes the actual act of it is less impactful. I think it first impacts you when you read a script and you start seeing it in the eyes of your mind, and you start imagining. And then when you interact with the director, and of course during the process, there are some moments that really sort of shake you, or some moments that are just beautiful, or some moments that just magically come together, and you can see where the film is going. Like, as an actor, having done now 40 films in 10
Yeah.
different languages, you get a sense literally on the first day whether this film is going to be what I'm imagining it to be, or is it not going to be. And some of the
Yeah.
films don't turn out the way you imagine, but I can say that I did them for the right reasons, at least. And then you again relive that whole experience when when the film is over. You travel with it to festivals, and you get audience reaction, you get
Yeah.
critics reaction, and you have those conversations, and like, you are making me remember those moments that maybe I thought I had forgotten, but they're
Yeah.
as fresh as yesterday. So it's and the questions it raises, for me, what the film is saying is really more important than even my role. Maybe because I never really wanted to be an actor, so even after 40 films, I was like this hesitant actor. Like, I'm doing it because I like being on sets, I like observing, I like being part of other stories. It was never really that the role is more important. Most actors would look out that, does my role have enough challenging things, is it going to excite me? But for me, what is the film fundamentally saying? And I think what Earth is saying primarily is that no violence can be justified. All violence is futile. Identity politics, divisive politics only destroys humanity. And, and friendship and love and everything can be challenged if we fall prey to prejudice. And so for me, that is something that I deeply, deeply care for. And it comes out in my social advocacy work, it comes out in my film work. Also, for me, I mean, work and life are not so separate. For
Sure.
conversation, we kind of divide it, to make it easier or whatever, but actually it's so deeply intertwined. How can your fundamental values and what you do, what you engage in, what you spend your time in, what you spend your thoughts in, how can that be so different? I mean, I understand there are a lot of people who may either not have the privilege or not may want to be, they work and then there is life, and that's fine too. But for me, at least, it's the same thing, really.
Yeah, And I want to certainly ask you about that in just a moment's time. But um, before I do that, Nandita, this is an industry, and in fact, a world, let me say, that is consumed by optics. But in particular, this industry, because itni public gaze hai, there's so much that's constantly being in the public eye for a lot of people. And then I suppose what that sometimes does is that there's this, it consumes you to be thinking about image management, to be thinking about, looks, to be thinking about the optics, as it were. And the reason why I sort of referenced you and Amir, and perhaps there are some other people also, is that, you're sort of you're of course within the industry, but yet have this ability to sort of tap out in a sense, or not tap out's the wrong word, but to say again, wo inner scorecard or outer scorecard ki baat aa jati hai that, I was looking at your Instagram and you were, it seems like you're just having so much fun with it. Like you'll put up a
Very
picture,
random.
but that's like, it's so stream of consciousness like that, right? And
Totally. My life is stream of consciousness actually.
and I
Everything is
love
like
that.
man kiya to kar liya, nahi kiya to nahi kiya kind of a thing.
Bilkul. And I loved it. Like you had the picture of your haircut and you said, I feel lighter, literally. And, and that sort of thing. And I suppose, and I was reading, coming back to that same blog about your father, I know somewhere you said that I'm glad that money was never a part of my definition of achievement or success. And I suppose my question, Nandita, is that I'm sure it's still very much a journey. I'm not saying one's arrived at some point of saying, well, I've mastered the
Absolutely.
art of being.
Always, it's always a journey.
Bilkul. And I'm not sort
Nowhere
of saying
to
that
reach.
yeah. But I'm curious to ask you, how does one put themselves on this journey of starting, or at least hoping to become comfortable in one's own skin, and sort of say, there's nothing wrong with wanting to look physically beautiful and with wanting to have financial independence and that sort of thing. But for that not to become the defining factor, and for log kya kahenge and that external not to sort of start overwhelming, your own true north in a sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think again, I owe it to my parents. Like, even in my growing up years, I don't think I ever remember like my father saying, "Oh, you're looking beautiful." Today it would always be that, "Acha, this what you're wearing." I mean, he wouldn't approve of this terrible shirt. Maybe the one that I'm wearing andar ki hai, ikkat ka hai, ye haath se weave hota hai, or whatever. But it was never about how you look. So I never thought it was really important. I mean, I have a younger brother. There was no separation. Even in the world that maybe 20 years ago, the sexualization of women wasn't as acute. I mean, there has been that pressure always on women to look better, or women to look beautiful, and light skin is a huge obsession. So growing up as a darker person, somebody or the other is always reminding you, whether it's in a shop where they give you anti-tan cream, whether it's your own grandmother saying dhoop mein mat jao, or so this whole thing, or this color doesn't look good on you because it's meant for fairer women, etc. But I think when you have the space and the upbringing or the opportunity to develop your interests and passions and what really then you start defining yourself with those things. So the space that how you look occupies so little in those 10 things that you are craving to do, that it's not that you don't want to. Like, often I don't wear earrings and I'm going to take a flight now, but I was like, okay, yeah, let me wear a earring because I'm going to come on the podcast. So ठीक है, मतलब आप उसको थोड़ा time दे दो, but it can't be your first 9 things for sure. If it's your 10th thing in life, then it's fine. So there are what do you really enjoy doing? What gives a sense of purpose and meaning to your life? We are all such a drop in the ocean कि हमारे जाने से दुनिया में कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ने वाला है. Greater people have come and gone and we have forgotten them, unfortunately. Who are we? So it's not for anything or whatever. I think to just give meaning to your own life, to be able to get up and say, this is what I want to do, and I want to do it really as well as I can. So I think that's one. Secondly, I've never really worked from within the industry. I
Yeah,
do see around myself, I see a lot of my colleagues, those that I really admire, their work and the kind of films, some of the films they have done. And if you actually see their journey, if you really want to be a full time actor, unfortunately, and more so for women, you have to do all of it. I mean, how you look is just unfortunately extremely important. These days, how many followers you have. I don't want to name them, but pick any brilliant, fantastic actor, etc., and look at their Instagram. They are having to do churning out things every day. I'm sure they kind of just do it like, okay, I have to do it, let me just do it and get it over with. I'm sure no sensible person would want to really engage with or be anxious about how many followers do I have. But these
absolutely.
days, even casting is based on how many followers you have. So I was introduced to Instagram very late, and for me, it's like a little diary. So if I ever want to go through my life, if I ever write a memoir, or if I ever want to tell my child, oh, we did this and that here, or I did that, or whatever, it's like a little diary for me. In the process, you share and you create a little circle of friends who you may not know, but they are following that journey with you. So unfortunately, if you are in the game of films, you have to play it by its rules. I don't know really anybody who has totally defied it. Very few. Maybe you can literally count on one hand. But so therefore, I've chosen to be out of it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your hair cannot be frizzy, even if it's really monsoon season. Your waist size has to be a certain thing. You have to do a certain kind of makeup. You have to be on Instagram, you have to be visible. Out of sight is out of mind. And for visibility, you need a publicist. 18-year-olds, when they come into the industry, they have publicists. They have a PR, they have a manager, they have this, that, and the other. So, I've just signed up an agency just because I get now more work, and it's just tiring to be having to sieve through all of it. But
Oh,
all my life I've never had a manager, I've never had even now I don't have a publicist. I feel the number of inquiries I get directly for interviews is already exhausting,
I
and I
can
think it's
imagine.
corroding to be talking about yourself all the time. I can't imagine what it would be if I had a publicist who was telling me आप ये भी कर दो, ये भी कर दो, ये photo shoot, ये interview, ये. So
Yeah.
I really, I sort of run away from all of that. So it's you just have to be out of it. You can't play the game and not follow its rules. You just have to not play the game at all.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And Nandita, you earlier spoke about, we were talking about sort of the fact that in your home you saw a role reversal. And I think I'd even read that you'd written that somewhere. And there was this interview that you'd done, I think, some months ago, and I happened to stumble upon it at the time. And I know I'm not the only one curious to ask you about this, but over there you were talking about working mothers. And you were talking about the fact that, they offer a sort of role model to sons and daughters without at
Absolutely.
all detracting from women who might decide otherwise, as long as that decision is coming out of their own agency, to not pursue, say, a profession in the sense that we know it. And I literally, Nandita, extracted that part and I sent it to Ammi and I sent it to my sister, and I've just heard it again and again and again. Only because, if I'm to be perfectly honest, it's hard, and it's something one grapples with as a working mother. And I'm not saying working mothers are the only ones going to, but that's just one form of sort of set of challenges, right? And it reminded me, Nandita, of listening to you, reminded me of this quote by Glennon Doyle. She'd written in her book Untamed. She was talking about the problems of glorifying motherhood martyrdom and this
Mm,
conditioning that we give our girls. And quite honestly, I think growing up in South Asia, I went through it myself, as did so many others, where आपको ये एहसास दिलाया जाता है कि, and Glennon Doyle says, it's almost as if she who disappears the most loves the most. It's this idea of
mm,
self effacement.
yeah.
And I almost feel like aapke alfaz along with hers, I need to have them pinned up, transcribed and pinned up so I can look at it at work and at home every day, just to remind yourself that, it's okay. But talk to us a little bit, Nandita, about the ongoing journey with motherhood. And of course, it's not as if there's one set of rules or a brand of parenting, as so many self-help books will have you imagine, but more sort of, what sort of son are you hoping, or are you trying to raise? And how does one sort of try and achieve work life harmony, as I'd like to say it, as opposed to even a balance? Because it's not like it's silos. Sometimes I'm
Exactly.
almost asked to imagine ke aage 6 baj gaye kaam se, or whatever the time is that one returns, and
Yeah.
then that's it. But it's almost like that's why I'm talking about trying to achieve some sort of work life harmony along with mothering.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And we all go through that. I think women, all women, their middle name is guilty, just to constantly feeling guilty. You're never good enough. You're always trying to measure up to somebody's standard and self-created standard of your own self. So we put so much pressure on our own self, which is in turn sort of because of the societal pressure that we have internalized, and we have seen our mothers and our aunts and everybody and friends go through it. So I am a very late mother, so I became pregnant when I was 40. I mean, I just crossed 40, and I wasn't even sure whether this is what I wanted to do. I'd kind of given up on the idea, and then when I married my son's father, and he said one sentence that if you have a child, you'll never regret. If you don't have one, you might. And that kind of stayed with me. And I always felt that, we overdo this whole mother, that you are incomplete without a child. And I have so many friends who've chosen not to have children, and they are absolutely happy. And I have lots of friends who have children, and there are some who are happy and some who are unhappy too. They're really struggling, and it's really taking a toll on themselves. So firstly, I just want to put it out there that I'm not generalizing that you must or you mustn't. There is no one way. That, at least that space we must give to each other, that whatever truly works for you is the best way for you. Let nobody tell you that one is better than the other. And but having said that, definitely this journey has impacted me so deeply that it's completely changed my life. Sometimes I wonder if I even remember the life before my child. Like it's so consuming, it's so overwhelming. It suddenly becomes a priority beyond everything. And I've always been driven by this deeper purpose to do my little drop, to make a difference, to do what you can, and give meaning to your life by engaging with things. And it's right from my school days to college, to I've done street theater, I've been in so many rallies and marches, and I remember when he was really small, I used to ask myself, am I going to be less courageous? Because now there is someone that I have to worry about, that I have to think. Whatever I do, the impact is just not on me. It's not just my life anymore. It's a limb, right? A child is like a part of your body almost. So it's going to impact another being. Am I ready to do it? Almost felt like I was being selfish in being foolhardy if I did something that would jeopardize his well-being, for instance. So yeah, I mean, it's been a very reflective journey. I mean, if I had to give a shorter answer, it really has been a reflective journey. And whatever I told my other friends, who were mothers and who were dedicating their lives to their children, they'd forgotten what they liked to eat. They would always order what their kids wanted. And I was very judgmental about it. I would say, "Arey, don't lose your identity. I mean, children are important, and of course they always will be, but you must not forget your own self, blah, blah, blah." And when I became a mother, I did all of that and more. I literally called up my best friends, and those that I had been judgmental with, I apologized to them. I'm like, this is an experience that has to be a lived experience. It's so difficult to imagine as somebody who grew up thinking I was a feminist, this, that, and the other. but I didn't understand that experience fully. And as an actor, I have played the role of a mother umpteen times. I've been pregnant like 3 or 4 times in films and gone through those big bellies and all that. I had no idea how uncomfortable it was. I was angry with all the women around me. Like, why do we glorify pregnancy? Like, everyone's coming and congratulating and this and that, but it's really uncomfortable what a woman goes through. Her and every month her periods, then that pregnancy, whether it's a C-section or normal or raising a child. I think we underplay enormously, and we really have to stop doing that. Not to be a martyr or anything, but just putting it out there as a factual, empirical knowledge that both men, women, and everybody, the entire range of sexual orientation must understand that this is a very, very traumatic, difficult process. Having said that, as a child, as a mother, you ask me what kind of a child am I trying to raise? Of course, you're burdened by so much because you want that child to be almost, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I burden my child, because I want him to be really sensitive. I want him to be very caring and empathetic and, talking to him about everything that I care for. Like, and yet you want that child to be a child. I mean, I've really lucked out with him because he's a very mature and a sensitive child, a voracious reader, a very questioning child who's constantly
Wow.
arguing with me.
Yeah.
He calls out all my contradictions, all my hypocrisies.
Okay.
So, he's my guru. Like, he'll say, "Oh, that day, but you did that, and now you're telling me this." And I'd be like, "That's true. Actually, I did that. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have." And I said that he does that because I think being a mother really makes you also a better human being, because you start seeing your own reflection in the child. Like, I used to
Absolutely.
get angry, very quickly. And I started seeing that in my son, that he would get very angry. And I remember that somebody had told me once that you only get angry where you know you can get away with. You only get angry with that person. And we started talking about anger. And one day he told me, and I did a TED talk, in fact, about it, that he said,
Right.
if one person gets angry and then the other person gets angry and then it just keeps escalating. That's the first time I remember. He was about 6 or 6.5. I didn't even know he knew that word. I'm like, escalating? Like, where did you
He
hear
said
that
that.
word? He said that, yeah, it'll just escalate. And he said, but if
My
one
God.
person also hugs and loves, then that anger can come crashing down.
My
So I
word.
kind of quoted him in one of my talks, and I said, he's taught me how destructive anger is and how futile it is. So, yeah, I think as long as you are having conversations, and you can never be the perfect parent. I do so many things, and I'm also very guilt prone. I feel, oh, look at that parent. Like, why? How come she's been doing this? Or that child. And you know that you never want to compare. Sometimes he tells me, he says, "Why are you comparing? You only told me that one should never compare." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, shit, I just did that." So you're catching yourself. But I feel all of us are flawed in different ways. As long as we catch ourselves, we are honest to our own selves, and to our children and to the people around, and give them the full liberty to call out when you're not going on the right path. Because if you only have yes men and women or whatever, yes people around you, then you're not going to grow. You want people who are critical with love, and that's the best way to grow. So yeah, I'm still struggling with parenthood, and it is beautiful, and it's given my life a different meaning.
Yeah.
And we travel a lot. I'm a single mother, so we spend a lot of time together, especially through COVID. We were really together. Now he's in a residential school, and next year he's going to be back. So these 2 years have been great, and I go to that school to teach. That's my little excuse also to
Wow,
see him more
lovely.
often.
Yeah.
It's a lovely school called Sayadri in the
Yeah.
Sayadri ranges in the Western Ghats, about
Oh,
four
my
hours
word.
from
Okay.
Mumbai.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a beautiful school, 100 acres of land. I mean, just greenery. And the first time I visited the school, when he was there, he was hanging from a tree, and there was a jhula there. And so where do you get all of that in the city? And zero gadgets, zero as in
Wow.
zero. So we do
Wow.
handwritten letters to each other, which is like my little treasure trove that I have.
Oh my word. Oh my God.
So, yeah, so every experience, I just realized that sometimes we overprotect. We keep wanting to save them from any hurt. But when I see my life, I feel it's those, falling and those hurts that has also made me who I am, and not just the good times. So I think, it's important and stuff as a mother. So you're always kind of saying, okay, how much do I hold and how much do I let go? So in
Absolutely.
some sense, his going to this residential school for 2 years was good for both of us, considering we are really close and all the time together. So
Yeah.
there's no one right way, and if at all I had to tell any mother, I would just say that just listen to that inner voice and listen to your child. They somehow, their instinct is much stronger than ours. We are marred by all our other thoughts and what people have said. We don't even know what our inner voice is saying anymore. Whereas,
Sure. Absolutely.
children are so spontaneous and instinctive, and every time I don't listen to his instinct, I know I've kind of made a mistake. So I try to. Sometimes we think we have more wisdom on things, but we need to use better judgment, when to listen and when to use our little guidance. As Khalil Gibran says, it's not, they are not really our children. It's like an arrow that's gone off the bow,
Absolutely.
and you need to let them have their own journey.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so nice, Nandita, to hear someone like you say that, because just like 2 days ago, and kal main ammi se ye kahi thi, but 2 days ago I had some of my daughter's friends over. I've got two small girls, they're 5 and 6. And inevitably, you find yourself sort of comparing, Acha, oh my God, they're so well brought up. They just had no tantrums. I said to my husband, we have to be open and admit our kids are spoiled. And you kind of went down this whole rant. And that's not to say that one shouldn't be open, but मुझे याद है नंदिता अब्बू हमेशा कहते थे comparisons are odious, and I find myself having to remind us as a family of that that's not to take away from the work we need to do on ourselves, on the kids, but it's just very reassuring to hear that, because I
We
know
all
you're
slip into that, yeah. No, I think it's also good to be able to have the ability to observe and take from others, because
bilkul, this is what I get.
how do you take from others and yet not put that burden or that pressure of comparison? Because I remember one day my son said, oh, you only see this kid when he comes over to our place. You don't know how he is with his mother, or you don't know how he behaves at his home. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not trying to. So then you realize that it's triggered his ego.
Sure,
We all have,
absolutely.
and kids at that age, he's going to be 13 next month. Kids also have a sense of identity. Sometimes they're trying to assert, they're trying to see how much they can push. There's a TED talk about, if your child is lying, it's not all bad or something like that, that it's actually good. And the whole TED talk is about that the child is just testing what happens, what is the impact of it, how is story being told, what is the other person, the parent, reacting as.
Yeah,
So we take everything like an adult, like, oh my god, this child has stolen this, or has cheated, or has lied. We all have done a little bit of gadbad in our life.
bilkul,
कभी किसी का देख लिया, कभी किसी से ले लिया. हम चोर नहीं हैं आज. We're not
absolutely.
really sort of such bad people. We have our moral compass somewhat in place. So I
Totally.
think, so this judgment, and children teach you, and therefore you then extend it to other people. Otherwise we all are so judgmental. Like, my views are opinions and others' views are their biases and
Yeah,
prejudices, or
yeah,
their
of course.
judgment. So I think practicing with your child also helps you reflect more on your own self, and thereby I think also heals you in terms of your other relationships.
Bilkul.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of self-work. That's my takeaway from life, that there's so
Yeah.
much self-work that one has to do.
Absolutely. And Nandita, I know you've got to go, so just last couple of things, but you said that your son's a voracious reader. And I just jumped at that. I was like, oh my God. Like, that's one thing I think the ability to raise a reader is a priority, for in our home. I'm sure, I know it must be in yours, but I'm also curious to ask you, What did you read as a child, and sort of what do you read now, and how what role does that play in your life?
Well, I was a voracious reader and I grew up with books. My mother, like I said, was in the National Book Trust, so we would go to these world book fairs and, grew up around writers and all of that. So I grew up with a whole lot of Indian books because National Book Trust was mainly different language books that were translated, but, lots of other language books as well, whether it was Russian translated into English or German or American or British or whatever. So, whether it was A Catcher in the Rye or
Yeah.
whether it was Midnight's Children or various books. But I have to admit, oh, like in the last few years, I've really not been reading, and I'm very guilty of it because just the work overwhelms you, the mind is cluttered. I'm, this email and phone, the amount of time all of this takes, the back and forth of that, often not being able to get the right kind of team to support you in the way that you really want to be supported in all these kind of admin, and especially if you're the perfectionist anal type of a person, then you want to oversee every little thing, then
Sure.
it's no excuse not to read. But my reading has really, really gone down. Sometimes, I mean, I just read long form articles and I feel like, oh, I've done the reading for the day. So, but I do definitely want to restart. And again, my son keeps reminding me that he's like, you keep a book next to you, but I don't really see you reading it much. So,
Yeah.
hopefully,
Yeah.
we are going to get into the habit of reading. Like, you take your book and I take my book, and we
Yeah.
sort of sit in bed and read, which is we used to do that when he was smaller.
Oh,
So I have to
yeah.
restart it because once he was in the residential, my whole day just becomes about work because there's nothing
Of
really to come
course.
back home to, and and it just spills over. And when you're not doing a job, it's your own work, and it's
Yeah.
just there's no end to it. And I'm a bit of a recluse, as in I don't really go out that much, and I'm not a
Yeah.
party person and stuff like that. So it's
Yeah.
just sort of keeps spilling. But I need to bring in that discipline back into my life. Is that
Yeah.
I'm not a full film person. I'm not a full social advocacy person, and the
Yeah.
the way it in. I mean, just the navigating through these two worlds, not in terms of what I do, but
Yeah.
the film people think of me more of an activist and don't really consider me as a film person. The social
Right.
advocacy people, those in various NGOs and those who have summits and conferences and panels, they think of me as this film person. So they
Yeah.
feel like, okay, we'll get more eyeballs if someone like her comes and talks. So I
Oh,
just get a lot of these kind of invites, and and sometimes it's difficult because my life choices also have been such where I've really never done anything for money. We started with that conversation. Like, money was a bad word in our household. I'm making slowly some peace with it. And, being a little shameless and saying, hey, I need to, because everyone just assumes, and I have ruined my own reputation by not taking money for a lot of
yeah.
the things
Yeah.
that actors do. I feel like, oh, but this is something I enjoy doing. If I'm going and talking about issues of women, or if I'm talking about identity and diversity or inclusion, and these are things that I care for, I'm like, why do I need to why do I need to be paid for it, but it doesn't work like that. And I do a lot of that work. Films I do, in fact, much lesser. So, and I don't do paid promotions or cutting ribbons or tweeting or putting on Insta something that so I don't do all of that. So I really don't have a commercial stream at all. And
Yeah.
so I really struggle with some of these things. So my life is a bit cluttered, but I'm slowly trying to create some kind of a semblance. So if somebody
Yeah.
wants to come and help me, and help me especially with the admin work, here is a announcement that
Yeah.
position is open. You can work remotely. Please come and help.
Yeah. 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 I can imagine because there's just too much of it.
It's too much, yeah.
Yeah. And have you had role models, Nandita? Is that something? And I don't just mean that.
Lots of
Yeah,
them
lots.
through life, through just people. And yeah, I mean, just talking to you and the kind of questions you ask, the depth with which you have your own understanding makes the conversation so much, more interesting. Otherwise, I sort of feel like, oh my God, another interview, they'll ask me the same questions, and, and it just becomes more of the same. So, just the way you were asking, I was like, oh, it's so refreshing to have someone who just asks authentically and actually cares about what you're asking, and not just sort of filling another podcast, because there are umpteen number of podcasts floating around now, right? So it's just that there are many people. I've been very fortunate, both in terms of activists, both writers, artists, filmmakers. There are just so many, and not just professions, just people and women, and
Yeah.
just whole lot of people who have influenced me, consciously, subconsciously. There's no one big role model as such, but many people, right from my family to my friends to the people that I grew up with. Safdar Hashmi, in whose theater, that street theater with whom I did. He was such an amazing person who sort of first time told, sort of put that seed, and had sown that seed that art can really be a means to change. And so yeah, many people who have influenced me, I'm sure, along the way.
And that's beautiful, Nandita, because that's sort of what I felt like. Of course, there are people larger than life. You feel, TK, they were like, you idolize them. But especially with your social advocacy, I imagine like on a regular basis, you're probably meeting just everyday
Lots of
individuals,
people,
which sort
yeah,
of
lots
touch
of
your
people.
lives in return.
And I also do, I mean, I do a lot of engagements, and in terms of just whether it's workshops or whether it's talks or conversations or conferences or summits, because there's always something to take away
Yeah.
from, just to hear, to be in touch with people, right from policy to ground level work. There's just so much to know, I mean, like reading, traveling, meeting people. These are three ways in which you can go beyond your little silo and navel gazing that we sometimes end up doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a meandering journey, like my conversation, but there's no pressure of, I think, reaching anywhere. I always think that just because also you're confused or you're wandering, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily lost. I mean, I and I just think specialization is slightly overrated. If you have multiple interests, you'll always be pulled in different directions. And I
Yeah.
don't feel that pressure of constantly excelling in something. As long as you do your best and you are in the moment doing that well, it'll take you where it has to. We are all in that hierarchy. There are people who are greater than doing better films. For me, for instance, no one film I can say, oh, this is the best film, because there are far greater films and there are films that are not as good at
Yeah.
it. So you're somewhere in the middle. So why take that pressure? Just do what you can, and do it with honesty and integrity, and it'll be what it will be.
Yeah. Nandita, exactly like you said that you spoke about I read that you'd written that the journey is as important, if not more, than the destination itself. Like,
Absolutely. I truly believe in that.
yeah, and and it's what you just said, that this idea of experimenting and dabbling in things, and you've spoken about your father doing that, but not everyone fully always understanding that. Um, and I want to just end with sharing a quote with you that I heard at NYU where I work, and
Hmm.
it was early days. We'd invited a guest speaker to speak to these undergraduate students, and I suppose I want to leave you with that, but also just get your reaction to it. And it was a quote by Sir Henry David Thoreau, but it's a mashed up version that he shared. It wasn't the exact thing. And it said something like, most men and women lead lives of quiet desperation and
Hmm.
go to the grave with the song still in them. What is your song or songs? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful quote, because there is quiet desperation. And I think in today's world, more so when Thoreau was there, probably, that, we are becoming more and more lonely. If you see, mental health issues have increased world over. Despite all this connectivity through social media, we are sharing our true feelings less and less. Because of fear of judgment or whatever it may be. So I think there is that quiet desperation, there is competition, there is the herd, there are pressures. So to really, if you're not in tune with your own song, it can overwhelm you. So I think it's really important to have that song. And for me, that song is really that it's everything is a journey. So when you think of it as a journey, you lose the fear of failure, And I think once you do not have that fear of failure, then there is nothing that is, it's not about success or failure anymore. And it also means that you'll be more adventurous when you don't fear failure. Then you can try new things without fearing that whether you'll do well in it or not.
Yeah.
You don't, everybody doesn't have to be a singer to be singing. So you can still sing for yourself. We don't even do that. We are fear of our own judgment. So I think just to make life, just to see life as a journey, as a continuum, as not judging even what is happening, and sort of submitting, not in a fatalistic kind of a way. I'm an atheist, so I'm not even talking about all of that, but submitting to the now, to just this moment fully. If I'm doing this conversation with you, this is the most important thing for me right now. If I'm going to be distracted by five other things, I'm not fully present. And I think the only gift we can truly give to whatever that our circle of influence or our people that we love, our near and dear ones, is our time and attention. And we are so, at least I'm so scatterbrained sometimes. I just feel like, okay, I just want to deep breathe, and every person that I want to interact with, I want to be fully there. That is what I'm trying to sing right now. That jo karo अच्छे से करो, जिससे मिलो पूरी तरह से मिलो. Just be present.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful, Nandita. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Sabah. It was so delightful to talk to you. And, yeah, I don't often say that, to be honest. So it was really lovely speaking
Thank you
with you
so
and to be able
much.
to share and hear your thoughts as well. And, I think the more vulnerable we are, and that's the reason I also share openly, all the mistakes that I make, because it's not that I want you to think I'm this amazing person, or we all are just as flawed as each other, and we don't have to even see them as flaws. We are just human beings. As long as we are on the path of, we recognize it, and we are on the way, wherever, however far or near we may be from wherever, it doesn't matter, as long as we are on the way. So thank you for sharing your feelings and thoughts as well.
Thank you so much. And I know that you had said about your films and audiences that if they come out of the experience feeling more disturbed, more alive, and more inspired, I feel my intent has reached them. And that's exactly how this conversation has made me feel.
Yeah,
So
my last film's Vigato. I hope whenever at some point it's going to be on OTT. I don't know when. That question always is hanging, and but whenever it is, because that's not in my hands, I hope you will all watch it.
I
Like
was
Firak,
just,
like Manto, it deals with just human predicament and relationship.
thank
Well,
you, Nandita. Thank you so
thank you
much.
so
I
much,
really
Sabah.
appreciate this. Look after yourself.
You
Bye.
too.